Hello and welcome back to The Secret Knowledge. My name is Shane.
I'm Allison.
And today we're talking about the 8th episode, number 8. We've been through 7 episodes so far.
And I've been feeling kind of crazy doing so much Greer stuff. Here at the end, I'm starting to get excited about moving on to something new. But I maintain that going hard on Greer was not a bad way to start the podcast. And what is this episode about?
This episode is titled, Who's Controlling the Disclosure Narrative? It's all about the media. It's all about how information is disclosed and how UAPs and UFOs are talked about in public spheres and through the government and all sorts of things like that.
And Greer's alluded to in previous episodes that there is a true disclosure movement that he is running through the use of his archives and the materials that he has.
Yes.
And there's a false disclosure movement going on, which is the government publicly acknowledging that there are these aerial phenomena happening, but he doesn't believe that what the government says is going on is what is going on.
Right. And actually, a really, I don't know if I'd call it interesting thing, but something that really piqued my attention at the start of this episode was that Dr. Greer talked about the tictac footage. And he actually said, and we can't substantiate this, but he said the tictac footage came out as a counter move against his film Unacknowledged. Do you remember that?
I did not remember that from the episode, but I wish he would have said how he knows that it was a counter move. Although I suspect it has to do with his nemesis, who is the woman that he formerly worked with, who wrote that now famous New York Times article about the tic-tacs. So
yeah,
perhaps there's a little bit of a bad blood in the separation, because he specifically states in the Cosmic Hoax that she stole his information and his sources and ran away with them.
I think he even implies at one point it was her who sabotaged the National Press Club event, and that she had like agents on the inside who
sabotaged, and that's why the feed went down.
That's why the feed went down.
That's really interesting because I spoke to someone very briefly on Twitter today. Her Twitter handle, I believe, is at papercrane111. In the very least, her channel is Alien Girl 111, and she said that she watched the National Press Club event live, and she specifically mentioned when it went down. And something that we wondered in the past was this a nationally televised event or not? And we'd done some research online to try and find out if that was the case. Well, now I have the answer. It was not nationally televised. She said that there was a special link that you had to have, but the public could view it.
A special link, like she watched it digitally on her computer?
She watched it digitally.
Really?
She said it was difficult because you had to have the technology.
Yeah, that's the year 2000. I mean, it would be probably pretty hard to just stream off a typical internet setup.
Exactly. You know, I think this would be better if I would just go to the tweet so I'm not misrepresenting anything she said. Okay, so I asked when and this is because I watched an interview between her and At That One Time about her personal experiences with this phenomena. And it was a really interesting interview, and I would definitely suggest that people check that out. But she referred to the 6-hour hearing in that interview, and immediately I was like, is that the National Press Club interview? Because if I'm speaking to someone that saw it live, she could kind of contextualize how she was able to watch it. And that's something we've been wondering pretty much since we've seen Unacknowledged. So I asked, when you refer to the 6-hour hearing, are you referring to the National Press Club event or something else? And she says, yes, the citizens' hearing, a big moment for all of us. I asked if it was nationally televised, and she said, no. It was a link on the internet. You had to live stream through a specific site, plus have a computer good enough for it to actually work. I'm still blown away. I was able to watch it and actually remember the feed going out for like an hour during it. So Greer's saying that the reason that feed went down for an hour was because of this nemesis.
Because he was sabotaged. When more than likely, it's because it was a streaming event in the year 2000. I mean, look, I remember trying to play Lego Indiana Jones Flash games in 2003 on my computer, and it like crashed my whole computer. So I would imagine it's kind of difficult to stream a 6-hour event put together by Bijou and Dr. Stephen Greer. But no, so that's sort of the central thesis Greer lays out, which is like, it's not necessarily me versus the media, but it's like, you're not getting any truth from the media, so come to Papa Greer.
Right.
Is how Greer sets things up. The thing I'm now grappling with is, while I reject Greer's story, I don't reject his assertion that the media is spinning UAP discourse. So I'm feeling a little lost now, because it's like, I don't believe Greer, but I kind of agree that we don't get even close to the truth. So what am I? Do I believe in aliens? Do I not? Where do I go now?
Yeah, that's definitely part of the reason why this is kind of a difficult episode to talk about, because I think we've, by this time, feel fairly secure that even if Greer has some viable information either about the phenomena or people who have experienced the phenomena, we know there's enough suspicious stuff about how he conducts his life, the way he presents information to the public, how clear he is with that information. Therefore, he can't be our leader in terms of who we're going to more or less take at face value. Mm-hmm. Not that we should ever take anyone at face value with this type of information, but it definitely can't be Greer. Greer is ruled out. However, sort of the premise of this episode, which is, I think, the best question we've gotten from Billy Carson's mouth so far, which was, how do we navigate the murky waters of disinformation? Because we know disinformation exists. We know there are a lot of competing motivations. So where does that leave us? Confused.
Well, Greer would say, and Greer's answer in the episode is, go to my website and watch all the disclosure videos. They show his website and his YouTube. So Greer's answer is, come to me. My answer is, I honestly do not know right now. I think we have both enjoyed talking about this series, but I think moving forward, I think both of us are kind of hoping we can find another hook, another way into this conversation that is compelling and is sort of intellectually stimulating, because right now I think I do feel pulled in more directions than ever before, even in a passive enjoyment for UFOs and UAPs, because it really does seem like for every inch you think you gain an understanding, you just have also gained a mile in like uncertainty and conflicting claims and conflicting stories, and everyone has a story to tell, and it's just like, oh my gosh, it's so much.
Yeah, and I would say, so this podcast was a couple years in the making, like just getting to the point where we were recording the information. And in that time, our viewpoints have changed. I mean, if we were making this 2 years ago versus now, the content would just be completely different. Mm-hmm. But what I have definitely experienced, especially moving away from only ingesting UFO information from the mainstream media and kind of going into some of the more niche corners of the internet, is that there is so much more than I realized that there was a couple of years ago. I mean, there's just absolutely an overwhelming amount of information to sift through, to acclimatize oneself to make a determination on. Mm-hmm. So I think that anyone out there who feels like they just know what is happening, whether they're a skeptic or they're just a dyed-in-the-wool believer, surely can empathize with those of us that are still undecided, that there's a lot to kind of go through in order to be able to make up our minds. So if you are just a skeptic and you know it's all bullshit, or you're an experiencer and you saw it with your own eyes, for those of us that don't fall into either of those categories, I would just say it's great that you've arrived, but I think you can understand why those of us that haven't devoted as much time as you are still having a difficult time orienting ourselves in this material.
Something I was thinking about while watching this episode and while just listening to you speak just now is, on one hand, I'm thinking, is this just what it feels like to be effectively disinformation campaigned? Because, like, who was the CIA director we covered in our unacknowledged video coverage who said he can't say for sure whether or not aliens exist, but he does say the UFO discourse in the public has all the telltale signs of a government-sanctioned disinformation campaign. And so I'm kind of sitting here wondering, like, is this just what it feels like to have been fucked with? Or, so there's that option number one. Or is this whole topic just full of way too many conflicting things that in their own nature are that way? You know, it's like, how much design is there to me feeling so confused right now?
If we are to start with the premise that aliens don't exist, UFOs don't exist, and instead what is happening is there's just like a collection of various phenomena, each thing which has its own explain it away sort of solution to it, it would make sense that we can't ever arrive at a determinant, this isn't real, it's all bullshit, because there's no one or two solitary things to point to. It's just this miasmic, amorphous, impossible to pin down, thing happening. Now, I don't think that is the case, because I think there are some events that are large enough and witnessed enough that I don't know if it was aliens, and I don't know if it's the government fucking with us, but definitely something is happening. For instance, the Phoenix Lights. And I just happened to have a couple come into the bar that I work some nights at the other day, who are from Arizona, specifically Phoenix, and saw the Phoenix Lights when they were in two separate areas of Phoenix. One was at work, and I don't know where the guy was. And lots of people from Phoenix saw the lights. Like, that was a mass event. So even though or maybe I shouldn't say some of you out there are definitely decided on what they think the Phoenix Lights are. But what is definitely true is something happened that night. Going back to what you said, that this could be kind of a classic government disinformation campaign, let's look at some of the things that Greer specifically said about those tic-tacs. He said it's a controlled leak, it was CIA authorized, and those tic-tacs are actually property of Lockheed Skunk Works. He's saying specifically the tic-tacs and the triangles are produced by the military, and this is coming from some sort of military agenda to get the public slowly brainwashed to hate aliens, to choose sides.
So I think one of my favorite things that this episode did point out was the way that UFOs are written about in newspapers or on online sites, where it won't say UFOs floating or hovering above a naval battleship. It'll say UFOs swarm naval waters, or UFOs, gather menacingly, essentially. And of all the things that Greer does point out that I don't know kind of if he's on the mark or not with media, I did find this actually super compelling. But I don't necessarily know that this is the government priming us for alien war. I'm going to go with Occam's razor here. I know this is a contentious phrase to go down in some UFO discussion quarters, but here's what I think's going on. I think when you write an article that says UFO floating above a boat, I think less people click that. I think when you write UFOs swarm naval battleship, it's just more clicks and more money. I don't necessarily think the government is gearing us up to hate aliens and to want to wage galactic war. Sometimes I think the more contentious the headline, the more scary it can sound. It's just more clicks.
Right. The fact that fear is just going to sell better than something neutral or something positive.
Mm-hmm. So I think one reason, like, you and I kind of keep approaching this point where we don't know what to say next is because there's really no answer. So like as I pointed out, I'm rejecting Greer's story. I'm accepting his assertion that the media is kind of weird, but because the media is weird, we can't parse it unless we know all, and we can't parse it unless we're experts in all these different little ways. So it's almost, I think what I'm kind of feeling today is a resignment to like confusion, kind of, or I think I'm accepting that I'm probably not going to have a conclusive answer to most of these things maybe while I'm alive, It's not going to come out tomorrow whether or not aliens are real. And it's not going to come out tomorrow, that the military was tricking us all and is going to, trick us into hating aliens. Like, I'm agreeing with the premises that the media is lying to me, which by and large I kind of think it is. But because of that, what is my final conclusion? I don't know, because I just don't have the whole story.
Right. And that makes sense. Like, we cannot come to a conclusion because there is not a conclusion, because we cannot sift through to figure out who is telling the truth and what the various motivations are to potentially not be telling the truth. But maybe another thing, and where I land with that, if it's unknowable, if there's this layer of information that we cannot get to because we're civilians and it's just going to be impermeable, I did like what Greer said when he says that disclosure needs to be a grassroots movement, and I think that applies whether disclosure is finding out the aliens are real and visiting, or if the answer is these things are man-made and there are mysterious forces that have motivations to produce these objects and yet still keep that knowledge that those objects are produced from us in a direct way. So one way or another, the answer becomes regular people asking questions, regular people investigating, having a voice, parsing this information out. But on the other side of things, looking at UFO Twitter and seeing the skeptics and believers get into it. And I guess when I say skeptics, what I really mean is non-believers, seeing the people that are almost antagonistic to those who identify as experiencers, but seeing them get into it day in and day out is like, it doesn't always seem like those conversations are productive. But then again, I'm looking on Twitter, which is a social media platform. So once again, I don't know that we're ever necessarily going to be able to go to those places as a resource to get our information. But now I've put myself in sort of this
I'm just going to interject real quick, and you can jump back in whenever if that thought comes back. But I'm going to swing things to Greer for a second and say, I think this series for me has kind of become, slowly without me realizing it, how to become a cult leader 101. Because heady, difficult concepts like this are also ways to manipulate people. Because, you just pointed out something that you agreed with Greer about was his push towards the grassroots. But I couldn't help but notice a focal point of the episode wasn't just let's go grassroots. It's let's go CE5 and buy my app. So I kind of wonder a lot of times as we watch these things, do con artists just know how to set up these impossible to answer scenarios just to get you into their net, right? Because there is no answer at the end of the day to media. Even if you just want to talk about political coverage, you're going to get vastly different stories, vastly different coverage across 5 to 10, if not more websites. And I wonder if people like Greer, either naturally or deliberately, choose topics like this to just garner followers around themselves. One of the first notes I took was just that the mainstream media as a talking point is very politically, socially, culturally loaded in a way that people get manipulated all the time.
And then in turn, he encourages people to use social media because that's going to reach far more people than the New York Times or CNN.
Yes.
And I think this kind of swings me back around to what I couldn't articulate a moment ago, which is to say, I want to say the answer is this grassroots movement, but I've also seen how unproductive a lot of the resources that we have as grassroots regular people quickly kind of disintegrate into chaos and something that feels often non-productive. But I say that also of have had very valuable experiences and exchanges of information.
Kind of going off the grassroots thing, sometimes I wonder, because you pointed this out to me, is the most important thing to do to just give as much attention and understanding to experiencer stories? Because experiencer stories, that's just coming from a person. It could be something like a Twitter thread. It could be a YouTube video. It could be a story on a podcast. It could be a documentary. Are experiencer stories the most important direction to go? Maybe. And I think kind of for my interests, yes.
I'm always going to find experiencer stories more compelling than a lot of this military information.
Yes.
Simply because anytime I am confronted with information from someone that's either ex-military or current military and has a certain license to disclose some information but not other information, is just, as soon as I hear that, I'm like, if it's military, I don't know what they're doing or what they have going on or what they're trying to manipulate for me. So I just kind of push all of that to this side and say, I'm not going to know. But then with experiencer stories, I think I always arrive with, like, that's that person's personal experience, and I value them for sharing their story, but I didn't have that experience, so I can't be convinced until I have that experience.
Right. And, maybe that's even where there's a bit of a difference between you and me, because I think I've seen ghosts before.
Right.
So.
And the ghosts leave me alone because they know I can't handle it.
The ghosts do leave you alone. I wonder if that'll be a lifelong thing or if it's a spell that will lift.
Okay. If the ghosts are out there, I'm going to once again, or aliens or whatever, I know that channeler or psychic that came into the bar told me that I can't handle it, but I want to be the sort of person that could handle it. So I'm requesting very non-threatening visits to me to help me, because I want to believe. I don't know what I believe, but I know that I'm open to believing something off the beaten path, if only I can be led there in such a way that I can arrive and feel pretty confident about the journey that I've gone on has been a real journey and I haven't been taken for a ride. But I feel like every time I find something like that, I follow it to its logical conclusion, and I'm left with perhaps something of value, but not the product that I was originally sold. And once again, I'm thinking of when we started looking into transcendental meditation.
Oh, yeah.
And we've used meditation and found a lot of value for it in our own lives. But when we looked into going to the workshops or the seminars, it essentially ended up being ran like in an MLM or something like that. So that doesn't detract from the fact that transcendental meditation can be useful, but I guess in the same way we have to remove the app from the CE5 to get value from it, we have to remove whoever's orchestrating the transcendental meditation.
Well, you did mention a channeler. Someone who told you.
Yeah.
Do you know where I'm going with
this? I know where you're going with this, and I had much less to say about the specific Greerisms of this particular episode, but this is something that cannot be ignored.
To me, this moment, if there had ever been a moment where I was going to change my tune on Greer, this was the no turning back point, where I've decided it's too much. There's just too much bullshit for me to ever accept. And it's this moment where he says, on the night where C5 or whatever was first drafting out its big ideas, and he lives just down the road from Thomas Jefferson's house, he heard a voice in his ear that was Thomas Jefferson's voice, and it said, "This is the next great American Revolution." And that the voice came out of Dr. Stephen Greer, and everyone in the room said, What was that? What was that? I mean, do you think you could ever believe that story in a million years?
Could I believe that story? Like, could I believe in channeling in general? I'm undecided on that. But with all the context I have about Greer as a human, fuck no, I'm not going to believe that he's channeling TJ.
TJ. But I think this is just one of those moments where, to me, this man seems to stop at nothing to elevate his own personal narrative. You would already think he had done enough building his case for why his project's so important. But he's like, okay, if you didn't believe me by this point, well, also Thomas Jefferson spoke in my ear on the first night it started, and he said it's the next big American Revolution. So this is very, very important if you didn't already believe me that it was important.
Well, and now that I'm thinking about it, in some of his documentaries, he's referred to as the founding father of you. I think maybe even in this very series, Billy Carson refers to him.
He does.
As the founding father of UFO Disclosure. And I guess that's because TJ's been whispering in his ear.
I just think at some points we make a lot of fun of Greer, but I think even still we underestimate how obsessed he is with his story and his own narrative. Going down the line of thinking that Stephen Greer is being very deliberate in the words he's choosing, and deliberately picking mainstream media as his enemy of the week in order to more easily...
He calls for people not to be sheeple.
That's what I was building to. He uses the word sheeple, which... Nowadays, I mean, sheeple's kind of gone out of use like a little bit.
I was about to say it's very 2008.
Yeah, like people don't quite go in as hard on sheeple anymore, but I'd still say it's very common now more than ever. I was watching a all gas no brakes, now Channel 5 video where there was a guy just standing outside of CNN headquarters and yelling at them all day and camping out and yelling at them more. And like, one, I loved that Channel 5 News walked up to that guy and just talked to him to see what he was all about. I mean, I think that's exactly the sort of thing that needs to happen with that guy, just to see, but now more than ever, if sheeple isn't the word people go for, it's the vibe that they're going for. And it's like, oh, you got that from the New York Times, like, how's the grass taste?
But you're sheeple either way. Like,
exactly.
Like you're sheeple and the non-believers are yelling at you for being such a doofy idiot to believe anything you hear. Mm-hmm. And you're a normie sheeple if you're talking to experiencers and you say something along the lines of like, I haven't had an experience. Like it's not... I disbelieve you. It's that you're asking me to believe something so far out of my reality that it requires a personal experience in order for me to say with 100% certainty that I think what you're saying. Like, I believe that you've had this experience, but that the experience that you have is what you think and say it is. And I hope that's not offensive to experiencers. I hope that's something that you can hear and empathize with and find a way to help, lead us to water.
Right. And I mean, you're not saying anything mean. Like,
right.
That's not your fault. You're just saying how it feels to be in your position. And I'd say I'm not fully in the other camp either. I'm somewhere in between.
But you see ghosts and have had some ghostly encounters and had that near-death experience that we eventually need to talk about.
Oh man, yeah. Well, that'll be for another day.
I think we should. So you introduced the fact that you and Greer both share a near-death experience in episode 1. So I think we should save talking about that until our final episode,
which will be episode 10. I saw today there are 10 episodes.
It's definitely 10. So going back to the sheeple conversation, he says the answer to not being sheeple is to be active, don't be passive, which I guess is referring to CE5, right?
I think so, because he wants to push the world toward, if we can get 1% of people meditating, things will be okay. That would be 75 million people or whatever. So Greer's goal seems to be to make gurus of all of us, which, hey.
And we're on the meditation train.
Yeah, do I disagree?
We found it's just there are no gurus, right? I mean, I think that's what one of our big takeaways from the learning we've done in the past few years is like, you've got to be your own guru. And as soon as you see someone pointing to themselves and saying like, you have to follow me, that you need to get a little suspicious. It's not that you can't go in the same direction as other people, but to appoint one person as your thought leader, that's giving up far too much of your personal power. Yeah.
And this might be a pretty kind of heady, weird thing to end on. Not that we have to totally end here, but I've been thinking a lot about why is meditation always so adjacent to this? We asked a similar question, which was, why is law of attraction often, with these kind of grifting people, or like what's kind of going on with that? And I've been wondering, like, you know, whether it's the verbose preacher who has like problematic views on the world, or whether it's the manipulative guru who uses his position of power for like sex or something, or to get people into vulnerable positions, why is it through spiritual channels that these people come about? And I've kind of had a new thought about this, which is that spirituality and spiritual gathering places are often where we're like very vulnerable as well. Like if you walk into a church while mass is happening, everyone will be going through the same motions, looking at the same point, and very defenseless kind of in a way. And I wonder if when we engage in spiritual practices like prayer or like meditation, it kind of just lowers our guard, makes us a little less inhibited, and also makes us like so accepting to whatever the next word is going to be.
And when do we most common have those moments of searching for something outside ourselves? It's often
When
at
we're
a time,
in a low place.
Exactly, we're at some level of personal crisis. And that's a huge takeaway. Like I think that's a really, really good point.
I first started thinking about this because I was thinking about the phrase, everything happens for a reason. And I was wondering why people say that and why it can really feel that way when it happens. And I think it's because we often say that when we needed anything to happen. And that's when we were most accepting of a change of direction. Like anything happens for a reason when we've decided we're kind of running out of reasons, you know, or running out of opportunities. And yeah, and I also think that phrase can happen at beautiful points of our lives as well. But I'm kind of thinking of this from the angle of how does this happen again and again? You know, why are people picking spirituality as their in to sort of?
You also it's accessible to everyone. I mean it's something that can be sold if you put it in your nice little package and a bow on it. But just because you can sell it doesn't mean it's something that can actually be sold. It's free. Like prayer's free, meditation is free, yoga is free. It's only when we wrap it up in this kind of consumerist parcel that it becomes perverted.
Right.
So our takeaways on some level might be a little light from this episode because we agree with Greer's premise, but we don't agree with Greer being the answer to the problem, which is that there is disinformation. The government is somehow involved with it either way. So I don't know that I've necessarily learned anything from this episode, but to that end, if there's someone out there that feels like they are very well oriented in this kind of military aspect of disclosure, and they have found a way to sift through what they think like as a way to determine what information is true or untrue, I would love to hear that presented to me because I don't know.
Right. Or if anyone out there just has a strategy for like, you're interested in UFOs and UAPs, but where you look to read, where you look to watch, like the source of materials you're willing to engage with and sort of your own barometer as to how you decide those things. Like if you have strategies like that, I would love to hear them. I think that's something that we're both interested in. So please feel free to either contact us or just write a comment below, tweet at us, and let us know your take on that.
If you're enjoying our content, please, hit the subscribe, hit the like, hit the notification bell, and we'll see you at the next episode.
See you guys. Bye.